Another laughed louder this time. He thinks he owns the place. Who does he think he is? President Traoré? The sun scorched the earth beneath the streets of Ouagadougou as life in Burkina Faso's capital carried on with its usual rhythm. Vendors called out from their stalls, children darted through narrow alleys with dusty feet, and the city buzzed under the weight of resilience and routine. In the middle of this heartbeat walked a man, calm, silent, unnoticed. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried himself with the grace of a man who knew what it meant to carry burdens heavier than himself. There was no convoy, no entourage, no dramatic announcement. Just a man moving through the marketplace with intention, curiosity, and peace. Wearing a plain shirt and faded trousers, he could have been mistaken for any passerby. A group of vendors, lounging near the shade of their makeshift canopy, noticed him. "Look at that one of them chuckled, nudging the elbow of his friend. "Walking like a general, head up, chest out, must be lost." They burst into laughter. The man, hearing everything, smiled gently and kept walking. No anger, no confrontation. He simply nodded, offering a polite glance, and moved on. It was an ordinary moment. To the vendors, just another face in the crowd. But within minutes, their laughter would vanish. A soldier from across the street walked briskly over to them. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He simply said, "Do you know who that was?" Confused, one of the vendors shook his head. "No, just a man." That was President Ibrahim Traoré. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a moment of disbelief, embarrassment, and awe. The same man they had ridiculed minutes earlier was the very leader of their nation, the youngest in Africa, and one of the most watched figures on the continent. The vendors scrambled to stand, their jokes turning into wide-eyed stares. One dropped his fruit basket. Another began nervously brushing dust off his shirt. But there was no time to correct their mistake. The president had already disappeared into the crowd. What kind of leader does that? What kind of president walks alone without guards through a market where his name is both praised and mocked? Ibrahim Traoré is that kind of leader. Born in 1988 in the humble surroundings of Bondokouy, a village in the Boucle du Mouhoun region, Traoré came from a world far removed from luxury or political privilege. He studied geology at the University of Ouagadougou, but soon found a higher calling in the military. As a young officer, he quickly stood out, not for arrogance or ambition, but for discipline, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of justice. In a nation plagued by instability, terrorism, and political betrayal, Traoré's rise was not conventional. In September 2022, when Burkina Faso's people were drowning in fear and hopelessness due to rising jihadist attacks and internal corruption, Traoré took a step no one expected. He led a coup d'état, ousting interim President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. The message was clear. Burkina Faso would no longer tolerate leadership that abandoned its people, but what separated Traoré's coup from others was what came after. He didn't move into a palace and isolate himself. He didn't surround himself with luxury. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, stepped into war zones, and lived among soldiers. Images emerged of him sharing meals with troops, sleeping in tents, walking through liberated villages. His message? A leader should lead, not from behind a desk, but from the front lines. And this is what brought him to that marketplace in 2025, to observe, to listen, to remind himself where he came from. The story of Traoré's silent market walk spread quickly. Within hours, local news channels picked it up. Within a day, the video of the vendor's insults caught by a nearby teen on his phone went viral. But the reaction wasn't ridicule, it was admiration. Across Burkina Faso, people spoke about the humility of a man who could have reacted with power, but chose patience instead. On television, one of the vendors later shared his experience. "We insulted the president, and he said nothing. He smiled. That is a man with strength, not weakness." Traoré's presidency became more than a chapter in Burkina Faso's history. It became a transformation. Youth across West Africa began looking at him as a symbol of possibility. While other leaders aged into their chairs and clung to power, Traoré stood for something new: servant leadership, a concept almost forgotten in modern politics. His policies focused on rooting out corruption. Officials were removed, investigations were launched. He directed funds toward rebuilding schools destroyed by extremist attacks, improving military training, and increasing transparency in governance. He invited journalists to accompany him to rural regions. He made surprise visits to hospitals and police stations. No scripted appearances. No red carpets. One visit to a remote village left people speechless. The president arrived unannounced, sat under a tree with elders, and asked them, "What does this country need that I am not seeing?" That question became his philosophy. Listening rather than commanding. Understanding rather than assuming. It wasn't all smooth. Critics questioned the military origins of his leadership. Western powers, unsure how to engage with him, hesitated. But Traoré didn't care about political theater. He cared about his people's safety, dignity, and voice. When terrorists attacked a northern province, instead of sending a spokesperson, Traoré went himself. Boots on the ground. His presence became a source of morale. "We do not run," he told villagers. "This land belongs to you. I will not let anyone take it." The soldiers, many of whom were barely out of their 20s, saw in him a reflection of themselves. Not just in age, but in courage. He didn't hide behind protocols. He slept in the dirt with them. He faced the enemy beside them. He became known not just as a president, but as a brother. Back in Ouagadougou, the story of the market incident became part of a national identity. Schools spoke of it. Parents told their children, not as a tale of shame but of pride, that their president was so grounded, so human, that even when insulted, he offered a smile instead of a scolding. Artists painted murals, poets wrote verses, and soon people across the continent began to admire this new kind of leadership. From Senegal to Ghana, from Mali to Kenya, young people started asking the same question: why can't our leaders be like Traoré? His approach to international relations was equally bold. He challenged neo-colonial systems, demanded fair treatment, and advocated for African unity. In a famous 2024 speech, he said, "Africa is not weak. It has been weakened. But the generation that let this happen is ending. We are rising." Those words echoed across Africa. For once, someone wasn't reading a script prepared by foreign advisors. He was speaking from the heart. And all this from a man who walked silently through a marketplace, who endured insults with dignity, who led with strength, but not ego. In the years to come, historians will likely look back at that day in the market not as a small story, but as a defining moment, a snapshot of what leadership should look like. When a man of power chooses not to wield it, but to embody it through humility. Burkina Faso still faces challenges. No leader is a miracle. But what Traoré has given his nation is something rare: hope. And not just through speeches, but through presence, through action, through silence that spoke louder than words. The vendors now keep a photograph of that day in their stall, not out of shame, but as a reminder that true greatness doesn't need to shout, it walks, it listens, it forgives. And sometimes it smiles through an insult, knowing that time will reveal the truth. That is Ibrahim Traoré. Not just the president of a country, but the voice of a generation that refuses to be forgotten. The man who turned a moment of ridicule into a movement of respect, and the leader who proved that real power lies not in being feared, but in being trusted.